So let's look at an example of a hand played out later in the game. We've been playing for several turns, going around the table, and in my deck I have added, through purchasing different money to improve my money supply, and I have purchased a variety of action cards which I'm hopefully going to use to try and improve my lot. So, taking the top 5 cards, I end up with a very interesting combination. The estate card is at this point no value at all, and I've got another card in there which I hope to be able to make use of it to do other things, but we'll wait and see. The other 2 cards are a village and a market, and they are what I like to consider or call facilitator cards. They facilitate me to play other action cards and do other things. A village is like, to some degree, a slightly weaker market, but it has one advantage over a market, which we'll get to shortly. For the sake of this example, I'm going to play the market first, which gives me, it says here, an extra card. So I'll turn that over and see what I get. And I draw a silver. Now, a silver immediately improves my money available to spend this turn. I go from 2 coppers with a market, which would make it 3, to 2 coppers, a market for 3, plus a silver, which would mean 5. The market, it says here, also gives me an extra buy, so I could buy 2 cards for a total value of 5. All up, this is shaping up to be a good hand. The market also says I can play an extra action card, and the village is an extra action card, so I shall play it. Now, I like to layer my cards one over the other so that I can see what's being played and what possible extra benefits each card gives me as I go. Because you could have a number of extra actions, for example, available, like you might end up with several villages or a combination of villages and markets or other cards that give you extra actions. You need to be quite clear about how many actions you have played and used and what's still able to be played. So anyway, back to our example, the village here says I can draw an extra card. Fantastic, and it just happens to be a rubbishy card. But it says I can play 2 extra actions. Now I have no more actions. So at this point, this hand is pretty much dead in the water. So I'm now going to make a purchase. I have a total of 4 treasure here, plus 1 on the market for a total of 5. So I'd make a purchase based on that. I could buy, as I said earlier, 2 cards for a total value of 5, or 1 card of 5, or 4, or 3, whatever I wanted. And then this hand would be discarded into a cleanup, and then we'd deal 5 more cards. But what about if this card had been different? Let's take that out and we'll go back 1 step and see what would have happened if I'd drawn another card. Here's the smithy. So if we'd drawn the smithy instead of that other estate, our hand would play out very, very differently. Firstly, the smithy says you can draw 3 extra cards. Now, we've got 2 actions available, and I've got an action card here, so let's play this action. That still leaves me 1 action remaining on the village. And I typically cover up a card when all the actions have been played off it. That way it's very clear to me what actions have been done. So at this point I half cover the village because I've used half the actions available. Smithy says draw 3 cards, so let's draw 3 cards and see what we get. Wow. Okay, I have managed to draw 3 extra action cards, but the village only allows me to play 1 more action card. So I've got a choice here to make based on what cards I have as to what I want to do for both personal gain, or perhaps based on this card here, the militia, whether I want to attack and interact with other players to cause them some discomfort while using the advantage of the militia. And here you have to really look at each card and decide what benefit you wish to gain from it and how it best suits your strategy. In this case, I have a workshop which if I play it allows me to gain a card for free up to the value of 4. It's like having an extra buy, but you're limited to a card with a value of up to 4, which means that the better victory cards are not available, but most of these cards that I have here are available. It would also mean I could gain a free extra silver, which is not a bad thing. The militia, as mentioned earlier, is an attack card, but it gives me 2 extra money to buy things with. The attack part is it makes other players go from 5 cards in their hands and discard 2 cards so they only have 3 cards in their hand. If I had 2 militias, they'd still never be reduced below 3. So you don't want to have too many of these perhaps, but one of these turning up to attack other people can really hinder their next hand. But keep in mind too with militia, if they have to discard cards down to 3 cards and they have treasure cards in it, it may not be a great loss to them. So it just depends. The Seller is an interesting card. It's a very cheap one, but it does give me, if I play it, it allows me to play an extra action. And it says here, if I discard any number of cards, I get +1 card per card discarded. So what that means is if I said, okay, well, this is useless to me, I could discard that and draw an extra card. And it would also give me the ability to play an extra action, which would mean I could play one of these 2 cards. So logically, that's quite sort of a done deal. I will play the Seller, and you'll notice I now cover up the village because I've played the last action of the village. And I discard my estate because I want to draw an extra card here. Wow! Here I've turned up a gold. You immediately can see my spending power here. My little hand of treasure is going to be quite good because I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I have 1 off the market for a total of 8. The market also gives me 2 buys, so 2 buys for a total of 8 gives me any card I wish here. I can buy any 1 card or any 2 cards up to the value of 8. So at this point I might decide I want to start taking provinces and work towards winning the game, or I might take a combination of other cards to keep building my deck. That might also include taking a duchy, which would give me some victory points and leave me a little bit of spare change to buy something else. But anyway, back to this hand, we still have another action we can play. And the thing with this game is you don't have to necessarily play every action. It's an option. Cards you don't play are kept in your hand secret, and as these would be normally, you don't have to declare these till we get to the buy phase, and we're still in the action phase. But for the purpose of this example with an open hand, you get to see what we have. So I might decide I want to take, that's a good question, workshop and militia. I might decide I'm going to take the workshop. Essentially this is going to give me, as I mentioned earlier, an extra free card, and that card could be quite a useful card. So I now have 1 militia card which I can't play because I've used all my actions up. So this, I normally just discard it right now because it's right out of my way and I don't have to worry about it. So I have, according to all my cards, the market gives me the extra buy and the extra piece of money. The workshop's going to give me an extra card up to 4. So I, first of all, better play that actually. Gain my card with 4, and I might say take, what's a good card for 4? Well, they're all good. I might decide I want an extra smithy, for example. So I take the smithy and I put it there, and then I spend my 8 and divide it up. And again, I might decide I'm going to take one of those and one of those in a combination, and then I discard the entire hand and gain the next 5 cards into my hand. Simple? Very simple. And it becomes quite addictive, this process of working through your cards left to right. You start to plan what you want in your deck by purchasing the cards you want, but there's this random chance aspect, which means that you're never quite certain what you're going to get. And because of that, you really need to start thinking about what cards you're going to buy and how they're going to best work in relationship to other cards. Some cards earlier on are probably more useful than other cards. You just have to understand that. Perhaps, for example, let's have a look at a couple of cards here. Improving your money early on in the game is usually a really good thing. As we mentioned earlier, one silver card is worth 2 coppers. And because a silver only takes up 1 space in your hand, it's far more efficient in terms of your deck to have more silvers than coppers. Same goes for golds. Having golds in your hand will really improve your purchasing power compared to having coppers. And in combination with silvers, you're going to be doing a lot of buying, which is great because this is what you want to concentrate on getting later in the game. And to get things like provinces, you really do need to have either lots of cards in play or better cards to play. And better cards is always better than hoping just to pull through enough cards to buy something better. So start planning to have better cards rather than just lots of cards. Other cards that can be used early on, and I think there are so many choices even within the 10 Kingdom cards that players can get quite confused as to what looks or sounds good. As a general tip, the first few hands, you're not going to get to play any action cards or extra money cards. They're discarded, so they're not going to start showing up to the 3rd hand at the earliest. And even then, you might have to wait till the 5th hand. Just depends. So, keeping that in mind, I normally start to think it's not probably till about 8th, 9th, 10th hand that you start to really gather enough steam with combinations of cards you've purchased to really start doing anything significant. So early on, buy cards which enable you to improve your deck or give you some way of making it more efficient. For example, purchasing silver is always a good way. But let's look at some action cards. Initially, a seller may not seem a great card, but if you've only got 2 money in your hand, it may not be a bad one because it allows you to get rid of cards which you can't play. This could include if you have lots of action cards or you have lots of treasure cards pop in your hand, and you can get rid of them and pull through other cards which may be of more use. A moat is the defense against the militia. I'm not necessarily so sure it's worth having unless there are people already purchasing militias, and as I said, because it's going to take a couple of hands for it to come through. Do you buy a defense early and hope, or do you just sort of play on and damn the torpedoes? Different styles of play will dictate what you do. Cards like the Chancellor are very interesting because not only do they provide you money, but one of the interesting side effects is that once you've made your purchase, you can take all your discards, put them back into your deck, shuffle it up, and deal them out. What this means early in the game is that your initial purchases can be very quickly recycled into your main deck and dealt out again, while other players who don't use a Chancellor actually have to play through their whole deck before they can get to the end of it and then take all their new cards that they've purchased and start again with the hope of getting them. So the Chancellor early on might actually be quite useful because it allows you to take all those lovely little cards you've just purchased and put them back into your deck and use them sooner than other people who don't. A village is a very popular card, and it's probably one of those cards that's going to run out sooner than others. The village, as I mentioned earlier, is what I like to think of as a facilitator card. It facilitates you to do more draw more cards and play more actions. Very handy card, but is it the card you want to buy first up? Maybe, maybe not. Because you don't have other actions to play initially, it may not be in your first 2 purchases. Woodcut is an interesting card. An extra buy and 2 extra money to go towards it. That can really improve an early hand, allowing you to buy a couple of smaller cards